Welcome to Decision Space, the only show to take place right here in the space between the turns in your favorite games. I'm Jake Friedman,
I'm Brendan Hansen.
I'm Pete Wissinger.
and this is the podcast about decisions in games.
And today we are hopping on board for a deep dive of a 1999 game. So the new hotness here on Decision Space, right? You come to Decision Space for the hot new games, which is why we're deep diving a game from 1999. That game being Splotter Spellin's first big hit, Bus. But before we get into that, we thought it'd be fun to have just kind of like a conversation about the games that we play that are kind of what we maybe would call shared infrastructure games or shared logistics games or games where there's too many cooks in the kitchen. I don't know how many ways to say this, where we're elbowing each other to, take up space. I don't know how to describe this, but we're going to kind of try to talk about a style of game that I think we all really enjoy and that Bus is a prime example of. But before we do that, a little bit of show business. We like to always say shout out when we get a new patron on our Patreon. And we have one. So welcome aboard the interdecisional ship, John Hoffman. Thank you so much for supporting the show. Woo, John. And for supporting the show, John gets access to the patron-only channel on our Discord, The Bridge. John also gets access to our pre-show and sometimes post-show discussion videos, which is stuff that is only available to our patrons. If you're interested in learning more, check out our Patreon page.
The Bridge has been blowing up lately, which has been very fun because we get to pre-understand why people are going to be mad at us before the episode even releases.
That's true. Yeah. So we record these episodes in advance. And as soon as we record the episodes, the video goes up to The Bridge. So at this point, our patrons have been listening to this episode you're listening to now for like 2 weeks. They've probably listened to it 3 or 4 times, probably, right? It's just one of those things that just gets better every time you listen. Anyway, I'm not going to stop time any longer. Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, that's a reference you'll get later in the episode, right? That's one of those that when you on that re-listen, you'll be like, oh, I get what Pete did there. We got to leave little Easter eggs for a future listen. Anyway, to start, let's attempt to dissect the style of game we're talking about.
Expand my bus route. Oh, sorry, I was trying to do.
Let's talk about what style of game we would say Bus belongs to in the bigger picture, why we like those games, and why some people might bounce off of them. So we've got this style of game labeled as perhaps shared space logistics games, high agency games. How do you all have any, if you were going to try and give a buzzy genre definition for this style of game, what would you say?
Yeah, for me, I would call them shared infrastructure games. And I would say that these are games where we build things that anyone can use, not just ourselves. So that could be as simple as in a game of Medina, we build collections of buildings that someone else can claim. It only gets used once to claim it and get points in the end game. But there's a spectrum here, right? Keyflower is another example of one of these shared infrastructure games where I have my own village and it is mine. The pieces that get placed on it come back to me, but I can also place pieces in someone else's village if I really want to. But because it's their village, they'll get the pieces I placed in it to use. So we have this sort of semi-shared infrastructure in Keyflower. But to continue on that spectrum, then there's games like Barrage, where there's a shared player board where we are all building things on that shared player board. Some of the things are still mine, but you can use my things to collect a shared pool.
I think a big part of these games, especially you talk about Barrage, is that these are games where there's a competition for resources, and those resources can be used by anybody. And so there's some sort of order of operations element of, okay, I really want this, but if I wait till my next turn, can I still get it then? And I think that I'm thinking back to our last episode about Euro games, where we very clearly came to a consensus definition for what is a Euro game.
Nobody
Yeah,
was
we
mad.
did.
No one
No one was
disagreed
mad.
with us. And when we talk about modern Euros, I think one of the key developments of the modern Euro is the personal player area being the focus of play. That usually these games have a shared board, but a lot of the sort of crunchy decisions happen in a personal player board or personal player area. But these games we're talking about are games where the game is a shared board. Maybe you have a personal play space, but the key decisions of the game are happening in a zone of competition. I don't know if you all would agree with that, because these are adjacent to Euros, right? Like these are, if we're talking about Euros having a slider and one of those sliders being interactivity, this is where you bump up that interactivity slider, right?
Yeah, by their definition, these games are highly interactive games, right? That by them being shared infrastructure, they have to be more interactive.
Yeah, I really like shared infrastructure game as a quippy title as well. I actually think Brendan was copying over on my piece of paper when he came up with that. But just to add something to the conversation, I think one of the key differences, right? Something that would make something a shared infrastructure game versus like in a highly interactive Euro is something that players are adding the board that could be used by somebody else, which which could happen on a game where all the focus on a central player board, or that game could be without that element, right? If we're only putting our own tiles down and there's not any way that Pete could use my tiles, then that's probably not a shared infrastructure game. That's just like an area majority game or some other competition for space. And I think what that does to the decision space in these games is it fundamentally makes it a question of like, is this the right time to do something?
Yeah, in part because you have to grapple with, is someone else going to do this thing before me? And then oftentimes there's ways that things will increase in value. In Medina, there might just be more buildings added to a cluster, making it worth more points. So I want to try to wait for the right time to grab it. And I think that's such a perfect encapsulation of what happens in a lot of these games. In Barrage, you can invest in additional infrastructure or add more water droplets and run the dam to get more points. But is it worth it to do that if someone's going to snatch out the opportunity from you? And what you should actually just do is just accept fewer points. And I think that's the tension that both of you have sort of said that these games are about, right? Is it better to accept a fewer amount of points now and be certain I'll have them, or risk speculating on what other people will do for a greater return if no one does what I want to do before me? That's what all of these games share.
Yeah, and I think I talked about in our Euro episode that Euros are games with puzzles. And I think these games we're talking about have puzzles. They're logistical puzzles. There's the order of operations is very important. And usually you have to take multiple steps to achieve the goal you're trying to get at. But these are puzzles where the noise comes from other players. Like these are puzzles without definite answers because the answer depends on what the next player in turn order does, right? Like, so you have to do this kind of like chaos theory sort of imagination. We're like, okay, well, if they do this, then it'll be still there. But if they don't, then how much is that going to hurt me? And so you have to really be keyed into what every other player's position and incentives are in that moment in order for you to make sort of the prisoner's dilemma optimal decision, right? Or at least possibly take a risk that will pay off if they think something else is more important for them at the moment.
I think that's right, Pete. And I think what it makes me think, I'm curious how this works for y'all, but it almost takes like the locus of the decision space from what should I do, which is kind of like an answer to the puzzle of like looking at the board, looking at your personal player board, looking at the systems and trying to figure out like what is the efficient move I should make, to kind of like when should I do it. So much so that in these shared space logistic games, what are we calling them? Logistic games?
Shared infrastructure.
Shared infrastructure games. Thank you. That's the
You should have looked
title.
at your paper, Jake. It was written on your paper. So.
Great point. Yeah, just consulting my notes. Shared infrastructure games. So much so that in these games, like Pete, when we're playing Indonesia, or when we're playing, it's annoying to use bus as an example because we're going to talk about it way later. There are points in the game where everybody will be looking at the board, just being like, okay, let's just like help figure out how we can ship these things the most efficient way for you, because that's not what the game is really about. The game is sort of about what's preceded that, right? Like what the decisions and timing that have led you to that point, where I don't think that really happens in the same way in a more puzzly Euro, where it's all about like, can I see the best move at this moment? In a game like Five Tribes, you might be kind of annoyed if everybody's looking over the board on your turn to try and figure out like what the most efficient point earning move you should take. That would actually be like bad manners. But here we kind of accept and appreciate it.
Another big example of this style of game is the number one game on BGG, Brass, right? Which makes me think that this is a style of game that probably resonates with a lot of gamers. And the thing about Brass is that there's several ways that this matters. One of the main ones being that if I put resources on the board, other players can use them. And if those resources get used up, that building flips over and is worth points. But maybe I wanted to use those resources. And so it's that there's a lot of competition for resources where if someone puts something out there, other people can use it. And I think that that just enriches what would otherwise feel much more like a traditional Euro. We actually had trouble categorizing whether we would call Brass a Euro. And I think it's because of the interactivity that we found that difficult to put a pin on.
I love that example, Pete, because another thing that I think these games often do, because of what we've been talking about, is they give players control often over an economy. Sometimes it's just the economy of which types of points to get. Like in Medina, right? There's literally different colors, and those different colors have different values. But if you're not playing a 4-player game, you also get a neutral building, so you can potentially affect which colors are going to be the most valuable in that game and what's worth what win to encourage other players to make certain decisions. But then even more concretely in something like Keyflower, certain tiles come out, and then there's winter tiles that are the scoring objectives, and you sort of get to choose what's easy to buy, what's not easy to buy, depending on what gets built, what gets bid on, what doesn't. Sometimes you might pay extra for something, and by doing that, you're putting less of it in the supply for that game, more or less. Not totally, but just what's available you're blocking from other people. So I think that plays an important role to the feel of a lot of these games too.
Would we say that shared incentives games are included under this umbrella or a related category? So, like if you take something like a Cube Rails game, right? Is this in the same neighborhood or is it just kind of slightly adjacent?
I feel like it's this. I mean, it's definitely in the same neighborhood at the very least, and I guess probably different people might come down on different sides of that line. But if you think about like placing down cubes as trains in Chicago Express, like nobody really owns those trains, right?
Right.
Like multiple people can gain points off that like shared piece of infrastructure, essentially, right? So I would say, it feels a little bit different because the agency is kind of in a different place.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not, at least I found, I'm not an expert in any of these games, and actually I've found you could go back and listen to our episode of Chicago Express and just kind of like what's happening here. It's hard to figure out like where people are getting advantages or not, but it doesn't feel to me like it's as much in like where those trains are being placed out on the board. So maybe that's kind of like another kind of spectrum, is like how much does like the actual placement of infrastructure matter versus something else about it.
Yeah. To me, Chicago, I agree that where the agency lives, Jake, is a defining factor that can make the games feel pretty differently. But it's like the different flavors of smoothies, It's the same dish. It's just seasoned pretty differently. Oh, wait.
Well, I would
Oh,
say
wait.
it's
I should have
like,
said milkshakes. Different flavors of milkshakes.
oh, guy, I'm going to bring up milkshakes later, but I think that it kind of reminds me of when people talk about like trick taking and ladder climbing games, and to some people they're
Yeah.
the same thing, but like if you dig deep down, you're like, actually, we're talking about different mechanisms and
Yeah, it
the way
depends
that,
on the cube rail game,
yeah,
probably.
right.
I
But
like
also
as I
like,
was saying that, I'm like, people are probably annoyed.
but like also in the shared incentive games, I'm more likely to be doing something that benefits someone else as much as it benefits me. And these are a little bit more zero sum, what we're talking
Mm.
about, right? Like it's more about me taking something of yours rather than us sharing in the benefits of something.
Yeah.
Would you agree with
Yeah.
that?
I think there's blurs line. That's a spectrum within these games for sure that I think affects the feel. You can turn that up or down depending on the design, right? In Keyflower, when you use my tile, I get to keep some of the meeples, which probably feels good. But if it's the tile that I was relying on for my entire plan, it sure feels like a bad
Yeah.
consolation
I
prize.
know you don't have green meeples, and I stick one on there just to block you
Yeah.
out.
Oh, or in Barrage, when someone uses whatever, you can use the water. If it's in someone else's dam, you can use their power conduit or whatever, and you get points. And it's so few points, it's almost sort of like I wish you just take them back. I don't want these, But then there's different strategies where that can matter, I'm sure. But to me, it always felt like a bad consolation prize.
So here's something that might be like universal about these, right? Or sort of on both of them, which is that I think they can be really intimidating to new players.
Yeah.
And a big part of that, at least for me, and some of these are games that still kind of intimidate me, frankly, like Indonesia or a lot of these cube rail games, because it's so difficult to say like, here's a good strategy or like here's a good move, because everything is so dependent upon you know the situation, the state of the game, and timing, that I think it can be hard to like teach people and hard for them to get the gist of it in a single play.
I think the reason why these games are intimidating is because they're incredibly harsh and spiky. And if someone makes a wrong move, someone will jump on it, right? Like these are games
Mhm.
where if I screw up, someone else will directly benefit from that and seize that opportunity immediately. And so these are games that are what I would call maybe spiky. These are games where if I screw up, I'm going to get really harsh feedback about that. And I might even hand a ton of points to another player because I didn't realize the implications of my action because they're that interactive. The agency is that high. And so I've talked about these games also as these are games where you can dig your own grave, or games where you have so much agency that the designers give you enough rope to hang yourself, right? Because you're given all this freedom, but like if you just do anything, then you will cause yourself to lose. And I think that's maybe what's intimidating as well.
Yeah, I think it could be both things, and I think with the kind of throwing the game element of it is, it can be a hard game for table balance, where I think many of these games also have the problem of uh you don't want. I think Bus is a great example. Medina is another great example. We keep using Medina as an example, which is so useful to the majority of our listeners, I'm sure. uh,
We
which
should be
is that
talking more
like,
about brass, I guess. But
yeah.
yeah.
Well, maybe this is true of Brass. I'm not as familiar with it, but like you don't want to be seated to the left of a very experienced player because they're just not going to leave openings for you. And the inverse is true. If you've
Yeah.
got a table with three ringers and one person who's playing it for the first time, like they might be opening things up for the player going directly behind them in sort of an unsatisfying, like, unbalanced, from the table balance, meaning the word, way.
So before we jump into talking about Bus, I want to talk about maybe things that we personally like about these games and maybe things that turn people off about these games. Okay. To finish up that way, like, for example, I would say that one reason that,
Just reading the notes. Exciting.
yeah, right, exactly. What, sorry,
What do you mean by that, Pete?
what? Sorry,
It's
it just lagged for me for a minute. So
sorry.
sorry, YouTube watchers. I've missed a little bit of something.
Okay, I was making a joke, but why do you find these games exciting?
Yeah, right. So I think these games are exciting because they're very replayable because they don't really rely on the sort of like variable sort of setup in order to make them replayable. They're replayable because when people do different things, it gives you a brand new decision tree. The interactivity makes them incredibly exciting to play over and over again.
Yeah, I think that for me, these games are so awesome because the highs are high and the lows are low. I play games to do things, experience things, feel things, see things, and I play games with other people because I want to have the interaction. And these games give that to you in spades. There's games of Keyflower that I remember because whatever I did in them, I will probably never be able to do again because it's such a product of so many different decisions that so many people made and the random tiles that come out. And I think that that's just cool. These games that can push and pull in all these different directions. And they also just feel dramatic. There's something about the timing puzzle that we talked about mixed with the interactivity and there being another human who really cares about what's happening across the table that just feels dramatic in a suspenseful way. I think these games are often suspenseful where you make your move and then you don't get a lot of, then you just wait with bated breath, right? So they feel a little tense at times, which I like, but I could see how people that could be a downside if they were looking for a more relaxing game. This is not the type of the style of game to play. These are not relaxing.
Yeah, definitely not relaxing, but also that makes them exciting because I think the skill ceiling is very high. And these are games where you can like watch someone kick your butt and get sort of a vision of what
Mm,
skilled play looks like. Because these are games where the skill play does not just come from system mastery, it
mhm.
comes from like understanding how to respond to a constantly shifting board state.
Yeah. I think to that point, I feel like a lot of these games have the kind of like meme of like the inexperienced player doing something and it's bad, and then like the skilled player, like it goes up and they're doing something different and it's like good or whatever, and then it goes all the way back to like the super master and they're doing the same move as the bad player, but
Yeah.
like with like a different move. Like that's how I felt learning T-Call, which is my favorite game, and certainly I think one of these shared infrastructure games where you're playing onto the board a piece that anybody can use. And if you play with like the advanced auction variant, you'll see beginner players bidding up to high bids for certain pieces, but then not necessarily doing it at the right time to use them well. And it would be better if they bid nothing, so then you get to like some experience with the game, and you don't want to bid at all for tiles. You're just like, I'll just take stuff for cheap and not spend my points. And then when you get to the highest end of the skill level, all of a sudden people are like bidding really high for tiles again because they recognize how important uh,
Mm.
certain parts of the game is to get a specific tile. So I think that's cool. One thing I love about these games, and this is not true for all of them, but I think it's definitely a design trend or something that these um, types of these shared infrastructure games lean towards, is just being like simple rule set. I think it is important that these games have a relatively simple and streamlined rules because you need that in order for the players to actually uh, interact with each other in a meaningful way, as opposed to interacting more so with like trying just to operate the game, which is a callback to some of our conversation with John Perry and on the episode last week as well.
I think that that's actually one example as to why Brass doesn't do it for me as much as some of these other games because Brass is complicated, it's complex, and my breaks between playing Brass are long enough that I feel like every game of Brass I've played, I'm either learning or relearning Brass. And whereas the first time I played Bus, I was like, I get it. And so the second
Yeah.
time I played Bus, I was already into the decision component, right?
I, I,
Mhm.
I I feel similarly about Barrage, which like it certainly has some of this stuff, but it also has some of these like more complicated personal player board systems,
Yeah.
right? Where you're doing stuff there as well. So I might see those two games,
Mhm.
great designs in their own right for sure, as being sort of more in like a hybrid space between like a game like Bus and some, something that's more of like a Euro style game.
Can we talk about why maybe these are not as trendy as modern Euros? Like if we think about like what is it about these that will turn a lot of gamers off? And what I'm reminded of, I recommend to everyone watch Tom Vassel's review of Food Chain Magnate because he hated it. He had a terrible time with it. And like part of the reason was because like he ended the game with $0 and then another player had like thousands of dollars. And he was just like, this was terrible. That's not fun. And so it makes me think of one of the things about these games that people might be turned off of is that it's got a lot of feel bad moments. I've described the interaction in games like Bus as like, I drink your milkshake interaction, whereas I've set myself up for what I think is something, and then someone slurps it right up and I get nothing. Someone else gets everything and I get nothing. And I think that is, you get often a very large point differential in these games, especially if you're playing with mixed skill levels. And so they don't give that feeling of fairness, to use Brendan's definition of a Euro, in the same way that maybe a point salady game would give a feeling of fairness where everything I do advances my position in some way. That these are games of like engine building and progress. And these don't, you have to really earn those feelings in these games. The game does not give you those.
Yeah. I think to take an even finer point on this awesome point you've made, Pete, I want to say why I think, give a theory for why it feels so bad to have your milkshake drank in one of these games. And that's that
Because
I
in
have
real
to go
life,
back.
I don't mind if someone sticks a straw in my milkshake and just drinks it
I'm
all up.
happy to share, especially with anyone on this podcast. Anyway, I had to clarify. So when people will not be surprised that I'm going to take us back to like early 90s Magic the Gathering. That's the most obvious place to go, right? Because as they were designing the Pro Tour, the designers of the game thought that for drafting, for the format, the best format would be that you open a booster pack and then everyone who's drafting sits around the table and takes turns drafting cards from that shared booster pack pool. It's incredibly skill testing, right? You have to look at the pack, track what everyone has picked, take all these different things into account. And when they were playing it sort of among people that they knew at Wizards of the Coast as they were working on draft, they're like, this is great. We love this format. And then when they got out in the world, pro players, really good players of Magic were like, this is awful. And it led to a really bad play experience. And a huge part of that is people hate making mistakes publicly. And if you don't like making mistakes publicly, you aren't going to like these shared infrastructure games. That obviously did not become the draft format. In the draft format of Magic the Gathering, you have your own booster pack that you open. It's private and you get to pass it. If you make a mistake, no one knows. And I think a lot of people like playing board games and making private mistakes that they can learn from because we enjoy learning. And we enjoy learning publicly, which you can show off by playing better. And you can make your mistakes privately. But in these games, your mistake is someone else's mouthful of milkshake. Right? There's no one gets a mouthful of milkshake unless someone else left their milkshake out to be drank. So that feels bad.
I think another aspect for why these games can be grading is just, this is such a non-statement, but obviously people come to games for different things. And I think this type of game is genuinely bad for a lot of board game consumers. If you're the type of person that is going to be like, and I was here at one point in my life where I was like just getting into the board game hobby. I was wanting to like convince friends that this was like a fun and cool way to be spending their time. Whenever friends were coming over to my house, we were playing a new game, and a lot of these people didn't have a lot of experience with board games. And I think that games that like enable everybody to have a fun first experience where they're like, yeah, maybe you win, maybe you don't win, but you're like building up something nice, in Ticket to Ride, you're kind of I put all these trains across the board and accomplish some stuff. In Castle of Burgundy, like it's pretty complicated, but like, yeah, I got some cool combo-y turns going. In a game where you can just finish, like in Todd Vassel's case, with like 0 points, where somebody else gets that, could turn somebody off to board games entirely, right? They're making these mistakes publicly. To Brendan's point, if I would never want to show somebody Food Chain Magnate or Bus, for their first game. I mean, there are other people that would certainly gravitate towards that, but I think it would be too risky, for me. And then another situation is you're just playing with like strangers, right? I think somebody said something very smart in our Discord when people were talking about kind of how I think they were talking about maybe how I've kind of started gravitating more towards these interactive games from like more standard midweight Euros, which I still like. Um, and kind of talking about how like a lot of players kind of end up going towards the more interactive side of the spectrum and like what is it about that. And one of the points, I think it was Benjamin in our Discord who made this point, but it could have been somebody else, and I apologize if it wasn't, was that like when people become like more and more like entrenched in this hobby, it's like it might be less that like somebody's individual taste is going towards that, but more so that like you have found like a solid group of people that you're always playing with, and it becomes much more comfortable to have these like games that create these big negative interactions for somebody and potentially bad feelings. That feels a lot safer when you're playing with the same group of people over and over and have good rapport and kind of like what the table dynamic is, than if you're just showing up at a local board game meetup at a pub, you don't really know who you're playing with at all.
That's the thing about my board game tastes, is I basically never play games with random strangers. I literally almost all of my game nights are with friends and people that I know. And so I think that is fair, that like if you've established rapport and trust with other people, that playing games where you do mean things like you do in something like Barrage, where someone did the huge Euro-y puzzle of setting themselves up with a dam full of water, and then you just slurp it up for almost no points just to stop them from getting it, that you have to sort of understand that like this person is not being mean. That's just the game we're playing. In fact, I actually love that they did that, because like, I don't know, we talked at some point about like games being an empathetic experience, and someone outplaying you in a way that means they were sort of paying attention to you. It almost is this kind of intimate moment, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially always in these games. And if you do it too much, it's usually bad, is the other thing that's great about these games. Like oftentimes the games of these that stick around, that people are willing to play over and over again with the groups that Jake, you were talking about, it's because the incentives are such that if you bully someone, neither of you are going to do very well. So there's a negative incentive, right? It's about playing nice until it's the exact right moment to play mean.
Yeah. All right. So are you all ready to jump into our game of the episode?
All aboard.
Let's do it. All right. So Bus was designed or published in 1999 by the Dutch sort of design duo that go by Splotter Spellen. The designers of Splotter are Joran Douwman and Joris Wiersinga. Sorry to Joran and Joris if I mispronounced your names. Sure. Anyway, this game is not their first game, but I think it was their first sort of like big box kind of like success. And it has gained, I think, greater prominence in the hobby because a nice new edition was published by Capstone Games a couple of years ago, with sort of like, I'll kindly say, improved graphic design and art. I do recommend everybody go look at the original cover and board for Bus, because I think something Splotter is kind of known for is these kind of like art project games, and their early games literally looked like art projects. Brendan, are you looking at it for the first time?
Yeah, it's like it definitely looks like a kid's book from the 90s in the best way. Like
for sure.
hand painted cover.
Yeah.
Not digitally hand painted. Just someone painted this for sure and scanned it maybe. But yeah, that's cool.
Right. So Splotter is kind of has a reputation. I would say a very large reputation for making games that are kind of for sickos. Like these are games that you kind of imagine you're like deep down the board game rabbit hole when you start playing Splotter games. They have these sort of legendary kind of aura about them of being these maybe, I think I thought of them as having a reputation for being complicated games, which I now would not necessarily say is something I would say about them per se, but maybe um, games that require a lot of buy-in from players
Like
and
hard to
games
play, maybe.
maybe, and they're games that
Heavy.
don't they're heavy, but maybe in a I don't know if I would even call bus heavy, but we'll get to that. Um, but they're also
Load of
games
the
that
decisions.
are
Just, I
very
can't hold it.
sparse in presentation.
Low to the
And
ground, like hard to get your fingers underneath, you know?
for sure. But yeah, so these are games that are not necessarily known to be like lookers, right? They're sparse presentation games where the decisions are incredibly rich.
Yeah.
We've talked before about how they have a design philosophy of high player agency and interactivity. Of course, famously saying that if you can't lose the game in your first turn, then why even put that decision in the game, right? That like everything in the game is driven by player decisions, and those player decisions have consequences that matter, and that would be maybe the ethos of a Splotter game. Um, I before we started playing Bus together, had played Food Chain Magnate a couple of times and thought it was very, very cool, but pretty intimidating to learn. I think it's substantially heavier than Bus. And when I played Bus for the first time, I was kind of blown away by how freaking elegant and modern this game from 1999 felt to play. Had you all had any experience with Splotters before jumping into Bus?
I think I played Bus before I played Food Chain Magnate, but I've played both of these on the table exactly once, you know, at least a couple of years before we started playing this a bunch, um, in preparation for this deep dive.
Yeah, for me, bus is it. This is really what I've played. And I will say
And
my
what was
impression
what was your understanding of Splotter before this?
I think my impression of Splotter is largely tied to secondhand information about Food Chain Magnate, which led me complexer to think it would be complexer. When I played Bus, I was really shocked, surprised at how sparse it is in terms of what's there. It's basically a worker placement game where you have a pool of workers that you get to choose when you play them, and then worker placement spaces that are lines that you sort of line up into. And the further back in the line you go, the less likely there aren't effects there until later in the game. Every turn, sort of the number of effects that can happen in these different lines changes, but there's only 6 effects in the game.
It's not a
7?
lot. And the actions
Yeah.
they just make sense. They're not complicated actions.
Yeah, they're not complicated actions, but like there is complexity to like learning this game.
Mhm.
You know, and I feel like that is why I say like no, there aren't like the longest rule books in the world, but they're still hard to play. Like there are just certain you know it's and I think maybe it just is because like they're using such different conventions than we find in like other, you know, kind of Euro games, right? Where you feel like you're developing, you play a bunch of board games, you kind of get a toolkit of like mechanisms, and sometimes like you can kind of anticipate the rules before, you know, as somebody's teaching it to you because you've just like played so much before, where it's like every time you learn a new Splotter game, it's like the first time you're like learning a kind of complicated board game, you're just like you have to let it really kind of wash over you and take it piece by piece.
Do we want to do private or not private, personal reviews?
I wish I could do private, but Brendan's been
Right.
copying me this whole episode. I don't know how,
You know, if we're gonna rate it on the uniquely decision space Solomon scale of a 1, 2, or 3, 1 being not for me, 2 being It's all right. I think it's pretty good. I play it. And 3 being I like this game a lot. In fact, I think it's great. For me, this is firmly a 3. I think that this game is absolutely excellent. I have been playing it continuously since January, and I'm not even close to sick of it. I think that it's kind of a genius game. So that's where I'm at with it.
Yeah, this one made it onto my top 10 this year, but I reserved threes only to top 5 games. So
Is that your review?
no,
That was
it's a
great. I
3.
loved it.
It's a 3. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's awesome. For me, buses feels a little bit, when I play bus, it feels like being on a carnival ride where I got on woozy and then got off feeling woozy and intoxicated. I don't dislike it, and I can absolutely recognize its brilliance. But I don't have as much fun playing it as I wish I did. It's so sparse, and it's so tight that there's not a lot of room for maneuvering or feeling like you are moving freely within a space. I feel like when I'm invited to play bus, I show up at the bus stop and they're like, "This is the time you have to do this," and they give me a prescription for fun, and it's cool. There's a lot going on,
Like a
and
bus
there's also
schedule.
very nuanced decisions to make. The first time I played this, I was significantly worse than the 5th time I played this, in which I am still bad. And and I like it. I really like bus, but I do want there to be more room to run around. I feel just a little bit like I'm constrained in a way that games like Barrage and Keyflower set me free to make different mistakes. Whereas in bus, I just make the same mistakes a lot. It's sort of like in bus, we haven't talked about, can I talk about a mechanism? It's important to my review.
Well, I
I'm
was
gonna
going to do
it.
a rules overview after this, but
Okay, then now I'm just talking, so I need to say a
well, how
number.
about let me ask you this, Brendan. Would you agree, based on your review, that part of your issue is that bus is not an expressive game?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you have to just do the things you got to do. Yeah,
Okay, so
you showed up with yeah.
At the end of this tortured experiences, what's your number?
2. It's 2.
Okay.
Yeah. But
I thought you might be going there.
That in bus, you have to think way more about what other people are going to do, I think, than even some of the other games we talked about. And we should talk about the rules overview and why that is. But for me, I spend a lot of time above the table, but not really in the way that I like with Donkey Space, where we're doing it iteratively. I just feel like I just don't know.
Well, bus is
will
a
you
game
stop
where
time? I think so.
bus is a game where if you wonder, is the action I want going to still be there on my next turn? The answer is just
the answer is no.
It's just no.
Yeah.
It's always no. You're going to get to do one thing you want to do, and like maybe you could do an okay second move.
And if you're lucky, you'll get to do it 2 rounds from now, because first you got to get in line and claim the start player action,
Okay.
and then you have to not want to do bus.
Let me briefly explain the rules. So bus is a game where everyone starts the game. It's a worker placement game. It's by some accounts the first worker placement game or one of the very first worker placement games. And in this game, you start with all of your workers. And essentially, what you're looking at is a map of a city where on the corners where roads intersect, there's places for buildings to be built. And you start the game with everyone just putting 2 buildings on the board. These buildings don't belong to anybody. There's 3 types of buildings. There's houses, there's workplaces, there's offices, and there's pubs. And the game works with this clock to where in one round, everyone wants to go to work. And then the next round, they'll all go to the pub. And then the next round, they'll all go home. And you just keep going in that loop. And then you have these actions, which have a set number of worker placement spots on them. And you always place on the earliest letter of the alphabet on the space. So, like, it'll be A, B, C, whatever. And so, if you're the first person to place somewhere, you'll place on the A. If you're the second person to place somewhere, you'll place on the B. But these actions, some of them are aligned A to B, left to right, and some of them are, Z to A, right to left. And the actions always resolve from left to right. And so some actions, if you're the first to choose the action, you'll be the last to execute the action. But the strength of the action is always strongest for the A player, the first to place. So sometimes it's just the best version of the action happens last. So the actions are very simple. The first action is just laying out more of your bus route. So we basically all are like building roads, like in Catan, and you have to extend off one of the ends of your bus route. And at the start of the game, you can overlap with other players, but once the game starts, you cannot overlap your route with other players' routes unless there are no free routes from an end. So that's the laying of tracks. The next
And you can't
action,
double back on yourself. Classic
cannot.
bus laying rules
yes,
in every
of course.
bus game.
It's very
Yeah.
thematic. It's all
Yeah.
very thematic.
Yeah.
Of course. The second action is to get new buses. So basically, you're increasing your delivery capacity. Everyone starts with one bus. If you have two buses, then when you take the vroom action, you can deliver 2 passengers instead of 1. If you have 3 buses, you can deliver 3 passengers with 1 vroom action.
They should have called it taxi.
No,
That's
vroom is
with like
vroom is the
8
best
O's.
action name. After that, you have placing passengers and placing buildings. Placing passengers just sticks more passengers to be delivered at one of the 2 bus depots on the board, which no one starts connected to at the beginning of the game. And sort of a big part of the early game is trying to get yourself connected to one of the bus depots. Placing buildings just lets you fill out the empty building spaces on the board. And there's like an order where there's a bunch of 1s and you can only build in the 2s once the 1s are filled, and you can only build in the 3s once the 2s are filled. Then there is the stop time action, which I'm going to circle back to. Then the vroom action, where people deliver passengers who are not already at their destination to whatever the destination is. And then lastly is just be the first player in the next turn, which maybe is the most powerful action in the game, because this is a game where the turn order matters immensely. Now, the big twist of the game is that if someone goes to the stop time space, when it's time to perform that action, they may choose to break the space-time continuum. Instead of people going from work to the pub, they're going to go from work and then turn around and go right back to work because someone broke the space-time continuum. Now, when you take that action, you lose a victory point. However, my favorite rule in the game maybe is that if there's a tie, whoever broke time the most wins. And then the game ends either when all but one player are out of workers, or if you break time too much, the game would end immediately. Now, you'll notice the breaking time action happens after players have placed their bus routes and built buildings. And so this is an opportunity for a player to cause people to take suboptimal actions so they can hedge their bets in case you stop time. But maybe you choose the stop time action just because you don't want time to be stopped and you're willing to waste a worker just to make sure you get to vroom. Anyway, that's how you play bus. This is, I basically just taught all the rules of the game.
Yeah.
They place the time stop action right at the point where it can cause most possible pain, maximum
Yes.
pain.
Absolutely. So do we want to, how would we characterize this decision space? Would we say this is like a static decision space? Like,
I feel so. I mean,
for new listeners, just so you know, we're talking about characterizing a decision space. We're talking about what is happening to the scope of the decision space as you play the game. Is it waxing? You're getting more options. Is it waning? You're getting fewer options. Is it dynamic? Is it punctuated waning? Is it whatever? Jake, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. I think static feels perhaps the closest if you want to do like an overarching thing. The point where you're making meaningful decisions is the worker placement. And you know, it is kind of confusing because you've got like the A to A, B, C, D and the left to right action. But for each of those 5 actions in the game, they become less powerful. You know, there's diminishing returns. The first person who goes there gets the best version of that, which means that like within the context of an individual round of the game, it's waning, right? Like the first player to go, this is why first player action is so powerful. Like the world is your oyster. You can have whichever most powerful action you want. But if you're the fourth player to go in a 4-player game, by the time you get to place your first worker of the round, there might be like nothing good left already. So, like it feels like quickly diminishing returns. So kind of like waning within round, but over the course of the game, you've got the 5 actions. They'll always be available to you on every single turn.
And I should have said, in this game, you take actions until you decide to pass. However, you always have to take at least 2 actions before you pass. But you could place 10 workers in a round if you want to. And then if you run out of workers and everyone else still has 4 or 5, you're just out for the game. Your score is set. That is it.
I wanted to say something about that, like, because when I first heard that and was like teaching this rule, like that gave me like heart pain. I was like, I don't want to like blow through my workers. It's not like really gonna happen because the
No.
game is designed in a way, as we were talking about with diminishing returns, that like often it's like painful to even place your second worker because you're just like, I'd rather just not, it's rare that you would get in a situation to be like, oh man, somehow I've accidentally like blown through all these workers way faster than everybody else.
Well, and on those turns where you choose to place 1 or 2 workers and then everyone else to score a couple of points, it feels terrible because you're like, oh no. But like you sometimes have to do it. And like
Spend
it can
a whole
be worth it.
to get 1 point. It feels
exactly.
There's times where you do spend a lot more. You have these really bombastic turns where you're stopping time and you're going to stop time. You claimed it. Then you're building a ton of tracks because maybe you're behind on tracks just based on how a few turns played out before. And those line expansion spaces have filled out in the round since then. So you're just gushing those on the board. And then you're going to add a bunch of buildings. But then also you have to fill the supply back up with people. So a lot of your game just gets loaded into this one round, which I think is a pretty novel structure. And this is the area, though, where I feel like the promise is you could blow all your workers and spend them really early. And here we're not really totally committing. And it's a better game for it based on what's here. But that's where I feel the tension the most is sort of, well, I took my action and now I can't believe I have to place the second one. I can't really do anything. So I guess how can I place it such that it makes other people building. Hurt more? Yeah. Sure. Or like, I guess I'll vroom. And like,
yeah, that's what you gotta do. You just hold your nose in vroom and just pray somehow that like what you need happens, and it won't.
Let's talk about the vroom action because the nastiest points of interaction in this game is the fact that we're all delivering the same passengers, right? That's where
to the same buildings.
That's where the I drink your milkshake thing comes in because maybe everyone's going to the pub, and I'm connected to 3 pubs, but Brendan is connected to 2 of those, right? And Brendan rooms before me. And he delivers to both of those pubs. And then my pub already had someone on the corner, the one that's left. And the person just hops in there because if someone's already at their location, they just go to it. No one gets the vroom point. And so then I took a vroom action where I was connected to 3 pubs and I got no points because someone went before me in the turn order.
And that's why the stopping time is so brutal because it stays at the same action. So any passengers that were on the board last round that could have gone to pubs, they're already standing there. So they don't need to go anywhere. They're good. And they're occupying those pub spots for like a double whammy. I did want to say something just to respond to Brendan's point about the fact that like the promise is you could place all these workers, but you don't really do it in practice. I think that the fact that you can, after playing this game more, like that is the difference between this game or one. I mean, there's more than one, but like that's a huge difference in design philosophy from this game and like, this game, if it was done today as like a modern Euro game, like it could easily be like everybody takes 2 turns and then you go to the next round.
Yeah.
And that would work as a game, but it wouldn't enable the variability from like player driven decisions that most of the time you play this game you're just going to be doing like 2 actions, 3, sprinkling in 3 actions or maybe a 4 action turn. But sometimes just because of the way the game shakes out, like so you or another player will have a turn where they actually do have the opportunity to place like, wow, I've never seen somebody actually do 7 workers in action, and now I've seen it, or like the stars are aligning for me to do it. And like that makes it a game. Like, it actually doesn't add any rules to the game system. It makes the game like more variable and replayable and exciting, but there is a cost there too, and it's like that complexity or like misaligned expectations that you're speaking to.
Yeah, but the cool thing is too, and I that's one of the things I love about the game is when those turns just pop off. And I think having room for those types of rough edges is something you can only afford from a complexity budget type perspective if the rest of the game is simple, like you said, Jake. It being fairly simple allows the game to push in all these weird potential directions. Can we talk about the interaction and how you incentivize people to do different things in this game? There's not a lot of levers. There's potentially stopping time, and then everyone can look at your infrastructure on the board and see what you're incentivized to do at the time that you placed it. You could still decide not to use it, to Pete's point. You could still do more things that might change what you do, but they could speculate. You can place passengers at one of the two, either the north or the south station. You could do that really early, make one of the pots more lucrative. And you can put buildings on the board of one of these three different types. That's pretty much what all you can do. You could expand your line to block someone to try to move. That's another
Jake,
way.
The game we're currently in, your bus line is so huge. Like you're connected to both
It's
bus
just
depots.
it's
And
one
I'm
of those
so
weird
jealous
things.
of your giant bus line.
Well, it's
Okay.
like I need to be desperately taking not expand the bus line action, but like people keep taking moves that leave it open for me, and I can't just let somebody get that juicy action either.
Oh, but okay, here's the thing. We talked about how no one can drink someone else's milkshake without your milkshake being drank in these games, right? So Jake has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 segments on the board, and I have 2. Guys, how many do you start the game with?
2.
Right, that's right. Jake is always blocking the spaces.
So it's so interesting because like this is a game where like the turn order matters so much, like so much. And it's not like there's an action that everyone can take for turn order, right? It's not like you can get in line for turn order. It's just one person's going to go first, then it's going to go around the table. So like if I'm sitting next to Brendan and he keeps taking the go first thing, I'm like, that's great because I'm getting to go second without using a worker, right? But if you're to the other side of Brendan and he keeps taking the go first action, you're like, God, stop going first, right? Because it's like I've taken almost no actions. I don't want to spend my first action taking go first, right? Like I'm behind. I need to be vrooming. I need to be,
I need to be vrooming.
Yeah, ABV, always be vrooming. So yeah, it's so funny. And you know, I think that what I like about the game is that it gives me a lot of the style of interaction that I like in Barrage. But with like a quarter of the rules or less. If you're someone who's like, I want a game that experience to complexity punches above its weight, I think Bus really does that, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
It's there's a lot to explore and it's incredibly easy to learn. And at least from a rules perspective, like learning the rules is incredibly easy. And it does the thing of like Food Chain Magnate or Barrage, where it's like, it is very much a shared infrastructure game. It a high agency shared infrastructure game, but without the complexity. It's the depth without the complexity, right?
100%. I just wanted to invoke this one more time since Barrage has come up again, where I'm thinking back to our episode on Barrage, and my like sentiment after playing that game is like, I was so intimidated to play this game, but it's actually not that bad because even if you're getting crushed, you're still like building a fun engine. Like you're still taking all those actions and like, so there is that element of that, which is not in Bus. Like in Bus, if you're getting crushed, it's just like, I didn't do anything.
I didn't play the game.
The other I have 2 segments, and the other person has 7. How did that happen? Like, you know,
and you maybe have 1 point at the end of the game.
Yeah,
but the winner has like 8.
Yeah,
Yeah.
When Pete and I played at Geekway, or not Geekway, at Gamers Ranch, it was like so dynamic and exciting of a game for everybody else because it was like everybody was at 6 points except for me at like 1. You know, it was like basically a 3-way tie at the end.
That was it did end in a 3-way tie. Yeah.
So
how exciting for you and everyone else, but yeah.
Can we talk about the board? So there's also on the board these all of the nodes where you can place the buildings adjacent to a node are labeled with a 2 or 3 or a 4. That's basically how you have to fill them in. And there's also ones. It is really big. It's a very large board in terms of the player space that you would need. I have spent a lot of time thinking about this board, trying to understand how this board was made, why this board was made in this way. I don't dislike this board. I think
I think the board is pretty good.
Fine. It's pretty awesome. It works great for the game. It's weird. This is a strange board.
Yeah.
In some ways, it is where they we're trying to simulate a city. So there's a lot of room. You could push in lots of directions. Have you all played games where someone's run away? The goal of the strategic path is sort of like, I'm going to run away and I'm going to build my own buildings over here.
Yeah.
My infrastructure will be no one else's.
That's my favorite thing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because then you can keep the passengers on nodes that only you connect to and just make like a line that you're going back and forth on. Correct. Yeah. No,
that's hard to pull off.
That's almost every time I've won, that has been what has happened, is I've been able to like say the basically the north routes are mine. Right? Like, yeah.
I've seen, and there's like on the, I guess the west side of the board, it's like you kind of have to like there's only a few entry points to that side. And yeah, the first time I played with somebody from our Discord who's obviously much better at the game than me, that was kind of what they did. They like went up there and they didn't have any points until the last couple of rounds and then just like popped off and just crushed everybody. And it's like, okay, that is something that can happen in this game. Now I know.
Yeah, I think that can we talk a little bit about the time stop choice? Just like to get into that being maybe the most famous mechanism in the game. So I am someone who's not afraid to use the time stop. I think that if you play a game of bus and no one stops time, it's a little boring, you know? It's kind of like a Chekhov's gun kind of like you've seen that this time stopping can happen. So it's always the threat, right? But I probably take that action just as often to block time from being stopped as I do actually stopping time, because that's where you can really get screwed, is if you've set yourself up for a big vroom and someone just stops time and maybe you waste multiple workers, which is devastating in this game. However, if all of my opponents have gotten in line to vroom and I haven't, that's the time for me to go stop time. Right? Especially if everyone else would gain more than 1 point. It's worth it for me to lose a point for them all to gain 0, right? Like mathematically, that's works out better for me. And so it can be really useful. Also, if nothing else, it's useful for a potential bluff of making someone take suboptimal actions before that decision. Like we've been playing with my friend Jared. He's been another person who we've been playing with. And I remember one game, I had taken the stop time action and he like planned his entire turn around it. Like he like built all these buildings and then I didn't stop time. And he'd like spent a ton of his economy building buildings that were like, oh, we already went to the pub, man. What are you doing? Like, you know? And so it creates, I think, a funny, spiky moment. When someone if someone decides to stop time, it's a big moment in the game regardless, right?
Yeah, I love it. It does create a funny, spiky moment, but it's always the same joke. It's right, like it's hilarious, but it's always the same joke. And I think when I say when for me bus is too tight, that's a little bit what I mean. And I love that moment. The first time we played bus, I was always going to the stop time space. I lose bus a lot. But it's fun.
Have you won yet?
Right?
Have you won yet?
I have not. No, I've tied and lost. Because I didn't stop time after I decided that I should stop time.
Technically, we don't count that as a win.
No, I haven't won bus. I'll say it on the record. But yeah.
Brendan, you're criticizing this game for like not being as funny, right? Like it's at least it has
No.
a joke, Brendan. We gotta give it credit for that. Most games, zero jokes.
This is
Um,
true.
I do think like that's one of the things that makes a Splotter game a Splotter game is the humor in it. Like I don't know, it's probably in an audio podcast, or hey, if you're watching on YouTube, it doesn't come off as funny, but like to have this like heads down, not heads down, like but like to have this like kind of like serious thinky game, like when you're playing this, you're obviously looking at whatever's doing, but like you want to be thinking about what's going on, what people are going for in order to do well. And then it's like, all right, time to vroom with like 12 O's. It just has like it has
Charm.
and like right, the stop time is a charm. The fact that like somebody builds a bunch of pubs when we're currently all at pubs, and then we don't go back to the pub right away as you would expect. Like it has like this funny element charm that kind of like lightens up what might otherwise feel like kind of like a serious board game in the worst way.
I want to talk about two ends of the game before we wrap up. The first thing I want to talk about is the first thing you do in the game is the game gives you the agency to place two buildings. How do you all make that? Is that like that's a decision? But it's hard to. I will tell you guys. I don't know if you've noticed this. I always place two pubs on the same corner. I've made that decision every time I've played, and then try and connect, and then build one of my routes connected. Because it's like, well, I know that at some point we're going to need to go to the pub, and I'm going to be happy because one thing about the game is if you have a corner with two of the same building, it's much better to connect to than a corner with two different buildings because it is more likely that someone will get stuck on that corner if they're two different buildings, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I like to do two of the same building at the start.
Yeah, that decision reminds me a lot of, to invoke, once again, Medina, a game that I'm sure the vast majority of our listeners are familiar with and have played. It's like the first couple turns in that game where it's you're just like putting a block anywhere on this gigantic board. It doesn't really mean much for like the outcome of the game, right? Because we haven't even placed our first bus routes yet. But what it means a lot for is like what the overall shape of the game is going to be. If we all just put pubs, and we just got a million pubs to start the board, like that's going to feel very different than a game, and there'll be like a lot less points potentially scored over the course of that game than a game where we all do the opposite of what Pete's suggesting and make sure that we're creating corners that have two different buildings at the start.
I think it's just also part of Splotter's design ethos to be like, make as many things as you can a player choice, right? Like, they could have just printed the first buildings on the board, right?
Yeah.
And then just been like, okay, this is the starting, or even just have like predetermined setups for variability. But instead they've decided, well, why not make that a player choice, right? And like that seems to be, if nothing else, their design ethos is that if something can be a player choice, we should make it a player choice, right? They put some guardrails on, right? It has to go on one of the spaces that's got a 1 on it. So they put a little bit of guardrails on to make sure that the start of the game works the way it's supposed to. But their whole thing is, because after the initial placement, every single thing that happens in bus is player choice.
Yeah. And in that way, if we're going back to this thesis about Euro games being about fairness, Splotter games like Bus are just bizarre world Euro games because it's the most fair. You're always the one making the decision. You're as informed as anyone else at the table. And that's why, I don't know, they're really cool. And I think it's why they appeal. They're like a different flavor of the same. We are not directly targeting anyone, right? There's no targeted interaction in this game, but it is still highly interacted. And I think a lot of these shared infrastructure games, obviously they're on a spectrum. When you use my thing in Barrage and you take my stuff, it feels terrible. But I think they allow for that sort of that really positive, plausible deniability moment of I'm doing it because of this reason or whatever, right? It's not. Yeah,
does not feel that way.
It never feels like bullying. It doesn't. You feel like you're getting bullied when someone does something, Jake? They're like kicking you off the bus.
I mean, like I don't feel like bad about it, right?
But do you feel like you're being bullied?
I don't know. I mean, I guess. I mean, you're right. It's not like it's different than somebody like marching their little warrior figures over to your
Right.
territory to attack you.
Repeatedly, yeah.
For sure, for sure.
The other thing I would talk about is I think probably the most interesting rounds. I think that part of what I like about Bus is I like its gameplay arc, because I think that the rounds
yeah.
get more interesting as the game goes, because the way that the action powers work is it's whatever the largest current bus capacity is
Yeah.
the like maximum power of every action and the diminishing returns from there. And so this game has a wonderful gameplay arc where you feel like you're doing nothing for the first few rounds, but every round, all the actions just get stronger. And so that means that the swinginess of a mistake or of a clever move just becomes more dramatic as the game goes on. And I think those last couple rounds, especially if it's like, okay, everyone has between 5 to 3 workers left. Is this the last round? Are we going to have another round? Do I pass and hope that everyone else doesn't just say ha ha and just use all their workers and screw me? Right? Like I think that
That
like
decision
it's
is crazy at the
yeah,
end of the game.
it's
It's
got
like,
such
please,
an awesome
everyone,
arc.
pass now. Let's screw Pete over. He's
Right.
out of workers.
I just think the gameplay arc is excellent, and that's part of what I like about the game.
I think so too, and that's also one of the things I really like about the game. And it's cool because it has this sort of ratcheting effect based on what you just talked about with the buses being tied to how much is happening, because it's always increasing. There's this great sense of momentum in bus. You are always doing more by the end than the beginning, but it's not linear. And sometimes linear progress doesn't feel like progress because the same person isn't likely to get a new bus 3 rounds in a row. So you're not going to have this massive linear jump. It's going to ratchet up where Pete gets to 2, then Jake gets to 2, then Pete gets to 3, then Jake gets to 3. What have I been doing? But, it has this interesting effect where it kind of jumps up. And I think that's novel. It's not always easy to create these sort of arcs that are progressive, that don't progress linearly, either forward or downwards. And this is a really interesting novel way to do it that interconnects it with a lot of other mechanisms that you care about.
Yeah.
It's cool.
Yeah, it feels like the exponential graph, right? Where it's like the first round, you do nothing. Like maybe somebody gets 1 point, or maybe just like one person gets -1 point. And then the next round is like a small increase, and then the third round's like, okay, we're going, and the fourth round's like, all right, it's going nuts, and then the game's over, which I think feels very satisfying.
Just to talk about our current game, the scores are currently 3 to 2 to 2 to 0. Me with 0, right?
Yeah,
And
Brendan, you're doing great.
Yeah, Brendan, you're tied for second.
This will probably be your game. Yeah, so I think like one thing I just wanted to call out about Buzz as we're kind of like getting to the tail end of this conversation. Like I don't know if it's just me, but I always like kind of talk about the game of chicken that shows up in these kind of like OG Euro game or shared infrastructure games for sure. And that's like absolutely a part of Bus, where it feels like, the decision space I'm operating in, it's like almost less about like the actions I want and more about the actions like I don't want. Like if I never have to place people out on the board because I'm just like using the people that other people place on the board, like that's great. Hooray, that's my ideal world. And the exact same with like the buildings, if I could just scoot around my bus route connecting to buildings that other people have placed, well then I'm getting ahead on that front too. But like, my like strong desire to like be like always expanding my capacity, always expanding my bus route could absolutely get me into huge trouble, because like if I don't seize the right opportunity to stop somebody from, filling up my bus trucks with like buildings that we're never going to get back to at the end of the game, or whatever else, or stopping time on me at a crucial moment. That's a huge game of chicken too, right? Like I want somebody else to be stopping time at the moment when stopping time suits me. I don't want to have to be the one to do it myself. Like all of these things are like so interactive and fun to like kind of like try and maneuver around.
These drafting style elements are one of the things that makes these games so good, right? It's all about how can I get away with copying someone else's homework. But Also, Jake, that was the most validating little rant because it makes me feel so much better about the fact that instead of adding people to the board, passengers, or putting out new buildings for my second action, I just like, screw it, I'm going to put it on Vroom because why not? Knowing I will not score any points.
One thing I like doing is I like using the building action as a screw you action and
Totally,
putting buildings on corners to suck up a passenger someone else
That's where it
thought they were
feels
going to
personal.
deliver.
Yeah,
That does, yeah. But just the last note I want to say is if this is one of the early worker placement games, I actually think its worker placement is incredibly clever and different from what we've come to expect from the mechanism. Like, I actually think that the sort of worker placement blocking mechanism, but it's tied with sort of this action queue system, I think is like a really cool worker placement system that's interactive in a different way from what we expect from sort of standard space blocking worker placement, right?
how can the first worker placement game be such a clever twist on the worker placement mechanism?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Brendan, I want to say that if you wish that this game allowed you to play a little more creative and vibesy, I keep talking about it, but I just have to get you in on Indonesia.
Yeah, I
Like,
mean,
I think
let's do
that,
that.
yeah, because I think that
when we're done with this, I'd like to play Indonesia.
I think so. And Jake, I'll get you in an Indonesia game that doesn't move at a turtle's pace.
So, like, not with Brendan.
Better.
So, like, a
Just
different
see-
Indonesia game, just to be clear.
Okay, we're gonna make a new Discord channel that's private. It's called Jake P.
Okay. Do you have any last words on Bus? Like, how about this, Brendan? It's your first Splotter. Does it make you feel like Splotters are not for me, or does it make you curious to dive deeper?
No, I really like Bus. It's really good. It's a great game. I want to play all their games. I think these types of shared infrastructure games are the games. The second board game I bought so I bought Pandemic, The Resistance, and then Keyflower. So, and then Seven Wonders. So Keyflower is the game I always wanted to play. That I multiple times would go up to people and do what Jake said I shouldn't do, and I should probably apologize to these people. Be like, you haven't really played board games. Do you want to play Keyflower with me? and you know, by winter, every time I was like, oh, why did I do this to everyone? I feel so bad. This is not the way to have.
As I slurp up everyone's milkshakes.
Exactly. Yeah. So I really,
you guys, weren't these milkshakes delicious?
Yeah, exactly. Look how good I am at this game. Yeah, but I love these types of games. I could play these games all day. I think that Bus, for me, I love logistics puzzles and networking puzzles, but that's not what this is. This is not that. This is using that as a metaphor for this timing game of chicken in a much more interactive thing. And I really like it. It's great. Yeah, I want to play more Splotter. Right. How about y'all?
Yeah.
Do you want to play more Splotter?
I want to get you guys on both. I know Jake's already dipping his toes in Indonesia. I think we would have a good time with Great Zimbabwe as well. So,
and like, we just have to continue. Long-time listener, maybe we end here. We'll know, like, we'll celebrate the fact that this is the first time we're covering a Splotter game on Decision Space. As one of our early Patreon rewards, we decided we would let people vote on the next game we deep dive, and I think the second vote was for Food Chain Magnate. And then rather than cover it,
third vote hasn't happened.
We just canceled the feature. We're like, we don't offer that anymore. So as long as it's not Food Chain
this
Magnate,
is before my time. The finale of our Splotter series will be a deep dive of Food Chain Magnate. How about that?
Okay, it's happening.
Great. Let's do it.
We'll go chronological. Excited. We'll go chronological, right? Which
2036.
We
skipped Roads and Boats.
We do. Yeah, I've never played Roads and Boats, but yeah,
I got a horseless carriage right there.
That would come after Food Chain, but
yeah.
All right. Well, listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this exciting ride on this very strange bus. If you'd like to chat with us about Bus, or if you'd like to give us maybe some more examples of shared infrastructure games, because we just said the same ones over and over, feel free to hop into our Discord, where we'll have a channel just for discussion of this episode, and we'd love to talk to you about these games.
Awesome. And we should thank, as always, Hembry for our intro and outro song. Reach out and see us next. Wait, we just stopped time. Start the episode over.
Welcome to Decision Space, the only show that takes place right here.